New York's vaccination rollout has gotten off to a bumpy start. According to the New York Times, as of early Friday, New York State had received or had administered some 700,000 total doses of vaccine. New York City had administered 337,518 doses, so about half of vaccine. And New York City had also received 800,500 doses, about 200,000 doses of which were earmarked to be used as second doses, and 100,000 doses of which were earmarked for nursing homes. So I couldn't find the figure for the total doses received by the state of New York, but I'm pretty sure that that total figure of doses administered of 700,000 is well below half the total doses received by the state. So obviously, New York is lagging behind. And to be fair to them, this is a nationwide trend. All the states are struggling with their rollout, and I think part of the blame should fall on the federal government for refusing to provide necessary aid for state and local governments. I've talked about how states are going bankrupt due to the lack of revenue from the lack of consumer spending, from people being unemployed and sitting at home without a job. So obviously, that's something that's needed that was not provided in the latest COVID stimulus bill. On the other on the other hand, they did provide money for vaccine distribution in that bill as well. So the federal government to blame for a certain extent, but I think the states also have to be held accountable and should bear should bear their fair share of the blame and responsibility. So that said, what's going on? So in New York, they're about middle of the pack. So there are states, Florida, Wyoming, Vermont, West Virginia. Interestingly, there are Washington. There are states that are doing better than New York, not much better. California is basically doing about the same. But of course, the stakes are greater for New York given how much more their economy has suffered. So, of course, as you may have heard and you may remember, New York suffered 38,000 deaths, by far more than any other state, due to a horrible mismanagement at the outset of the crisis. In mid-March, when they waited 2 weeks too long to shut down the economy, to shelter in place, resulting in likely tens of thousands more deaths, avoidable deaths, and at least 10,000 more deaths than a state like California, which is double New York size. So New York, obviously, its economy has suffered more as its initial response was worse than the other states, and it's really influential economic sectors like tourism, the restaurant industry, hospitality industry have really suffered. Hospitals are basically closing. Restaurants are facing a winter of extinction. Theater, we have no idea when theater or Broadway will be back. We have no idea when concert venues, sports venues, Madison Square Garden, Barclays Center will be back. So New York's, definitely commercial real estate companies have fled the city and moved to either teleworking from home, working from home, or just moved to smaller office spaces outside, the very, very expensive downtown areas of the city. So commercial real estate suffering. So basically, New York is facing, I think, a more existential crisis for its economy, and therefore, I think, faces greater urgency to respond efficiently and more rapidly than the other states, which again sort of reacted better at the outset and suffered a lot less, deaths. So that said, what's going on in New York? Why is New York not responding as efficiently, as urgently as one had hoped? So I think there's a few factors for that. Number one, I think, is just again mismanagement. Part of that has to do with, I think, corruption. I think Andrew Cuomo, uh, who has delegated the administrative authority solely to the hospitals up to this point, despite having a really a really uh, a really equipped administrate distribution apparatus across the state, across the various jurisdictions, departments of health. Um, Cuomo has opted to basically give the delegate the sole administrative authority up to this point to the hospitals, and I think part of that is due to just rank corruption. Uh, the uh, the greater I'm reading from the New York Times. The Greater New York Hospital Association, uh, which has been pushing for years for more state reimbursement money in the form of higher rates of Medicaid payments for doctors and hospitals, basically uh, donated $1 million to Andrew Cuomo's reelection campaign after the campaign asked for a donation for his reelection campaign. And for the state Democratic Party, they went ahead and made a $1 million donation according to campaign finance reports, which was repaid in earnest recently with roughly $140 million a year payout in the form of, again, higher Medicaid reimbursement rates for healthcare providers, for hospitals and nursing homes. And that, despite the fact that Medicaid was already over budget. So, again, for years, New York had resisted calls from this very influential lobbying force in Albany politics, to pay them. And then they went ahead and made an investment, paid them $1 million, Cuomo's reelection campaign, as well as the state party. And then, inexplicably, otherwise inexplicably, a $140 million a year uh, payout, despite a already, again, over budget Medicaid situation that led to and influenced Cuomo's decision to then cut spending for Medicaid for recipients of Medicaid. That's a decision, of course, that was otherwise inexplicable and had many people shaking their heads as people were obviously dying and in more need of healthcare across the state than ever, whilst in the middle of losing their employer-based healthcare insurance, right? So there was that, and I think that's really the only explanation, the most obvious explanation here as to why he would delegate this sort of administrative authority, prioritizing the hospitals at the expense of very capable network of, again, uh, administrators across the state. I think that probably he's basically paying, he's lining up the pockets of his donors. And so, that they invested in him and he won his reelection. And I think that explains it. But I think it's really egregious, I should say, given, and I'm reading from the Albany Times Union, which talks about, they quote public officials who say that they could basically vaccinate the entire southern half of Albany County within a few days. Um, within a few days, if they were granted, again, vaccines. They have various points of distribution sites set up, including high schools, concert venues, churches, fire departments, college campuses, senior centers, which they have dispersed throughout the state, which could handle, again, we're talking about systems, real statewide systems of coordination that are already in place, that have for years been used, that have been prepared using funding from federal grants, millions of dollars of funding. Um, they indicate that, the Times Union Center, as an example, is one particular location that over a 10-day period could manage to vaccinate 38,000 people. There's also mention in this article from the Albany Times Union of a particular episode some 5 years after the terrorist attacks of 9/11, in which they demonstrated that a team of five healthcare workers could over a 4-hour period uh, vaccinate 942 healthcare workers over a four hour period. So it was a drill that indicated that in a 48-hour operation, the team would be able to immunize 12,000 healthcare workers. So at the time, they were basically seeking a uniform procedure, the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, to deal with a mass casualty event, including a bioterror attack. All citywide hospitals were directed to participate in a drill in which they demonstrated exceptional efficiency. So again, uh, now the governor has indicated, or his, uh, officials from Albany, from the state party, have indicated that, oh no, this is just, we don't have enough vaccine doses, and once we get up to speed with supply, then we'll be administering. There'll be more cooperation between the hospitals and the state, the state apparatus. But I think part of that, again, is definitely corruption on the part of Andrew Cuomo. I think part of that is also just mismanagement. Andrew Cuomo has a notorious authoritarian streak that has been really onerous in terms of the guidelines that have come forth from Albany. So apparently, this is a process that was supposed to have gotten underway over a month ago with the vaccination process. And apparently, when they started in December, vaccinations were occurring at a very leisurely pace. Apparently, reportedly, only during regular business hours. Weekdays, very little on weekends, almost none on holidays. And there was also a weird prioritization, a really rigid, streamlined prioritization of healthcare professionals only, as opposed to healthcare professionals and the elderly, which are obviously the most at risk, demo. The elderly, the 65 plus club. So in the beginning, he was basically making it real hard. Not only was he not tending to the most vulnerable population, but he was also subjecting those who did take the test, those who did get online for the vaccination, to taking a 51 question questionnaire or test in order to prove that they were eligible. In addition to, just really weird, just really streamlined, really onerous processes. He reportedly threatened to fine $1 million in fines for coronavirus vaccine fraud for any healthcare providers that would, or licensed healthcare professionals, pharmacists that would vaccinate anybody who was not on Cuomo's like really specific list of acceptable, eligible candidates for vaccines. So part of that was just Cuomo just being a dick. Honestly, he's got this really authoritarian streak. He's sort of a control freak, and I think his worst instincts just sort of became a real impediment. Now, he's recently since expanded the pool of eligible candidates to 65 and plus, plus 75 and plus, in addition to healthcare professionals, nursing home residents. I should mention nursing home residents were also at the front of the line in the beginning, as well as nursing home staff, but healthcare professionals. So now he's starting to expand out the branches. Public teachers. I saw that public education educators had recently been included. I think he caved. He came under immense pressure when obviously New York was only managing to administer about a third of its supply of vaccine, about 2% of the population. I think in the beginning of January, less than two, about 1.5% of the population had been vaccinated, despite really ambitious goals set. For example, Mayor Bill de Blasio set a goal of 300,000 vaccinations. No, a million, excuse me, a million vaccinations for just the month of January. So, really ambitious benchmarks that obviously they had failed to clear. So, Andrew Cuomo did something that he always does as sort of like a really arrogant, smug, elitist prick, and that was deflect blame and sort of point fingers at the hospitals themselves, blaming them for sort of uh, for being slow, and basically threatening to levy fines of six figures, $100,000 for any hospital that within the 7 days from receiving a supply of doses failed to exhaust the full supply. So Cuomo doing really Cuomo things, but also I think don't underestimate the corruption. Andrew Cuomo, pretty corrupt dude, clearly in the pockets under the influence of a major player, a major lobbyist in Albany politics, that being the Greater New York Hospital Association, uh, in alliance with the influential 1199 SEIU union. It's a lobbying force that again has recently come to eclipse real estate, the local real estate industry, as the most influential lobbyist in the state. So Cuomo corrupt, basically doing favors, delegating the centralized authority to his donors who profit obviously off of the money, but then also I think just rank incompetence. And again, New York, given its, Andrew Cuomo has been really overhyped by the media, by the mainstream media, cable news outlets, whom of course are based in New York. So they have sort of a personal bias, sort of rooting interest in the governor of New York's success because he's their governor. So he's been sort of glorified and held up as as the gold standard of leadership during the COVID pandemic, which couldn't be further from the truth. Again, 38,000 deaths, far more than any other state, more nursing home deaths than any other state as a result of, again, campaign contributions from the Greater New York Hospital Administration, which association, which also runs many of those nursing homes. So Cuomo basically ordered those nursing homes to take COVID patients, which of course led to increased death rate in those nursing homes for nursing home residents. 50% more than the 40% that we saw nationwide in nursing home deaths. He also gave those nursing homes immunity, a liability shield from lawsuits from the families of those who lost their lives due to those kinds of really irresponsible decisions made at the top levels of Albany. So Andrew Cuomo really botched the initial response. Obviously, the economic hardship in New York has been far worse than the rest of the country as a result. And you would hope to see New York turn the ship around. I live in New York. I'm a New Yorker. I'm biased. I want to see New York do well. But I also wish that we had a better governor.